My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently. Jason, recently I have been testing out playing some board games, getting back to my roots, as it were. So you may not know this about me, or maybe you do. I don't remember if I shared this, but really my love for role-playing games and Dungeon World all stemmed from a desire to find a board game group in Houston, because I originally had a great love of board games. I
do remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and probably my favorite board game that I would play with friends was a game called Descent Journeys in the Dark, which is a dungeon crawl kind of game. And lately I've been having the itch to play something kind of like that. And this new game that was kickstarted a while back very successfully was brought to my attention, called Gloomhaven. So I found a copy, which was difficult because it was very successful, and any that were selling were being upmarked, but they had a second run, so I managed to get one at MSRP. And I started playing it with my friends, and it's pretty fun. It was scratching that itch, but I kept thinking to myself, like, what if I incorporated this in a Dungeon World? Because this seems like it would be so cool to have like this kind of thing in Dungeon World. So Gloomhaven has like a really specific kind of setting and like characters and things like that. But it doesn't take long to like catch on to them. So like we always talk about with Dungeon World about like, play into the tropes. Like this game doesn't quite do that with like its character classes and things like that.
So I guess the appeal here to you is when you say, I wish there was something like this in Dungeon World, you mean like the setting is different.
Right. Exactly.
Or the implied setting. Like Dungeon World has a really specific implied setting, right? Which is, what you referred to there, the tropes of Dungeons and Dragons, essentially, right?
Right, exactly. And this isn't, it isn't so far that it would be foreign to anyone who is familiar with, the broader sense of fantasy or anything like that. But they're really unique and interesting kinds of people going about in this Gloomhaven setting. And I've only been introduced to a very few of them because the game restricts you on how quickly you get introduced to some of the stuff that's within it, because it's kind of a legacy board game. So
yeah, I remember reading something about that at the time when it was kickstarting.
Yeah. So like, for example, like I'm playing a character that is called a Mind Thief, which is the race is it's a vermling, and it looks like a half man, half rat thing. And it's basically like this race of creatures has been shunned by society because, well, they like to eat dead things and not like cook to dead things. And they're just kind of gross in how they live. So since they've kind of been shunned and rejected, like they'll just hang around with each other. Or if there are no other vermlings around, they'll hang around with rodents. And the ones that hang around with rodents enough, like they're able to have this empathetic, like psychic link with the rodents. But if they like keep doing that, then they either like go crazy or they become a mind thief, which can like kind of control the rats.
Okay, well, that sounds cool.
Yeah, so like that's one, and then my friend is playing one called a Cragheart, which is the race is Savas, which are basically like rock golem type creatures, but they have like this big glass dome over their chest. And they train all of their lives to try and control a particular element, like one of the basic elements like water, earth, fire, air. If they're particularly good, they can control more than one. But if they cannot control any, then they are shunned by their society and cast out. And their glass dome over their chest is shattered. And that's why they're called Craghearts.
It sounds these sound very like imaginative. Yeah, it seems pretty cool.
It just kept me thinking the entire time I was playing Gloomhaven. I was like, man, this would be really cool to kind of explore these characters in a Dungeon World setting where there's a bit more role-playing going on. So that may be something that I do later on.
Oh, like adapt it or something?
Yeah, like after I've played this game some more, like I may just decide I could run something similar to this in Dungeon World if I wanted to. Just make some compendium classes or adjust the playbooks as needed. I could see that working without any issue.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I have a couple of thoughts here, actually.
Yeah.
Well, one thought and one question. My thought is that I am thinking of Grimworld. Did you ever get a chance to play Grimworld with us? Early days of the Gauntlet?
Yeah, I played a little bit. I think I played in 2 sessions of Grimworld.
So what Grimworld does, which I thought was really interesting vis-a-vis Dungeon World, one of the things that it does many interesting things, is that it has a number of different species you can choose from for your character, right? You're not restricted to just elf, halfling, or whatever's on the sheet, right? You pick a separate species entirely, and there's like 20 of them or something, right? And they all have like unique moves and different features and things like that. And I bet that would be a great resource for either finding some parallels to some of these like Gloomhaven archetypes, or inspiration for like custom moves and things, right?
Yeah, definitely. The other piece that the game was doing really, really well for a board game was making fictional positioning and the moves that you could trigger to like get bonuses in combat like really, really interesting. And I was like, man, this would look awesome on screen. I don't know. Like, I think I was just thinking about that, and like, I don't know that there's a way that I could inspire my players to be quite as creative as some of these moves we're making it happen in the game. Like, I've got some pretty good players, but sometimes they just still want to swing their sword.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense. Well, so I had a question as well, and this is kind of changing the subject a little bit, but something you said earlier was, you're playing board games to scratch a particular itch, right? And that phrase, scratching a particular itch, is something I've used in the past to describe more sort of dungeon crawl, stat heavy based board games, that kind of give me that feeling of something like Pathfinder without having to play Pathfinder, right?
Right.
I guess my question for you is, when you say scratch that particular itch, is that what you mean? Like, or is there something else like kind of fundamental about the fantasy board game experience that you don't get playing Dungeon World?
Yeah, I think that you've hit it pretty well on the head. It's the number crunching and the min-maxing and the non-relationship angle of a dungeon crawl, and a very, very dedicated dungeon crawl that I don't do as often in Dungeon World.
Yeah. It's so funny because I haven't done a straight dungeon crawl. Well, prior to this week, I hadn't done a straight dungeon crawl in Dungeon World for quite a while, actually. And I actually did a straight dungeon crawl on Sunday. And you definitely don't get the same kind of like, oh, I'm really excited about these stats and things, right? And all my powers and whatnot. Like, you don't really get that so much. But it felt good, though. There is something. I am one of those people who likes the feeling of a good dungeon crawl,
Yeah. It's something I haven't done in a while. I usually end up in a dungeon in one way or another, and whenever I play Dungeon World long enough or run Dungeon World long enough, but it's not quite the same as, moving characters about a board and being concerned with how far away somebody is from somebody else. And
right. Yeah. No, for sure. How much space you have left in your pack and all that kind of stuff. Right.
Right. And all that goes with it. Initiative and all that.
Well, awesome. Well, if you continue this idea of like adapting some of the Gloomhaven elements into your Dungeon World game, maybe we get an update later, see how it's going.
Yeah, definitely. I think the last note that I have about it, the last thing that Gloomhaven made me remember was how much I like getting loot, and especially like really minor magic items, or even almost like mundane items that just have a function beyond what like is immediately implicated by them. And so I might incorporate some things like that into any loot that my players end up finding. Here's like some ideas and examples. Like in Gloomhaven, there were a couple of sets of boots. When's the last time a character was like, "Oh yeah, I need me them boots."
Right.
Like
yeah.
One of the boots like lets your character travel a little bit faster, which is very important in a board game. How could that be important in Dungeon World? Well, maybe like once per session, if they're defying danger using their feet, they could get like an up step on the roll or something.
Yeah, this is probably beyond the scope of this conversation. I'm not going to get into it too much right now, but I do find that occasionally it's sometimes hard to make a Dungeon World player care about the magic item they just found, because the fiction is so narrative focused and not focused on numbers, you can kind of like do the cool stuff always, right? Or you can try to do cool stuff just by narrating your character doing cool stuff that they could do within reason, right? Like having the sort of like simulationist restrictions of D&D or Pathfinder lifted gives you like a sense of like feeling cool and powerful, and magic items in D&D are one of the things that make you feel cool and powerful, right? And so in Dungeon World, there's not always that like, oh man, I need this item because that's going to give me like the really awesome cool experience that I want, right? Like you're kind of having that always in Dungeon World, right? And so it kind of goes to this idea of like, well, how do you write a good Dungeon World magic item, right? And I think that's a great question, and maybe something we talk about in the future. But I just want to kind of put a pin in it there because I think that's the thing that happens, right? Like, how do we get the players to care about a Dungeon World player to care about magic items, like you would in D&D? Because in D&D, it's a big deal, right?
Right. Yeah, it's generally a bigger deal, and like everyone's having all kinds of gear and things, and even like more mundane kinds of items that have different effects.
Yep, absolutely, sure.
So, yeah, like I think the other one that I was thinking of is not a magic item. It's just a different weapon. But if you use the weapon and destroy the weapon, you get like a bonus on damages. And I was like, that'd be a really easy thing to say. Like just put it on whatever weapon that the player picks up, and it's like in Dungeon World, oh yeah, you have that hammer now, and if you choose to break it on your enemy, it deals plus damage or whatever, and you have to narrate that in the fiction or whatever. But that's all I had to say about Gloomhaven and how it kept me thinking about Dungeon World even when I wasn't playing Dungeon World. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is, what should I be on the lookout for?
Just a really quick thing this episode for this segment. So the Gauntlet, who produces this podcast, also produces our zine Codex. You've heard us talk about it before. You're probably going to hear a commercial about it at some point in this episode. I just wanted to let listeners know that Codex the back issues of Codex are now going to be available on DriveThru RPG. For about a year and a half or so, we have resisted putting them on DriveThru RPG. Not resisted, but just we kind of wanted Codex to be like a special thing for Patreon backers, right? And we've got enough issues kind of out there in the world now, and enough people asking about back issues now, that we want to give them an opportunity to pick those up. And so Codex is going to start being on DriveThru RPG, the back issues, that is. To get the newest issues, you still have to pledge on our Patreon. But so right now, as of the day of this recording, Codex Chrome is in the feed. The early issues of Codex especially have lots of Dungeon World stuff in them, and Codex Chrome is no exception in that regard. It has a section called 19 Science Fantasy Elements or something like that for Dungeon World. It includes magic items and monsters, custom moves, and places of power, which was a pretty cool little touch, I thought. So yeah, go check that out. It is currently pay what you want for Codex Chrome on DriveThru RPG, and there will be more coming soon.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be. Listeners, I thought this week me and Jason would be talking about the Recruit special move and Hirelings.
Yeah, super interesting. It's so funny you brought this up and you put it in the notes, because just as of yesterday, it was the first time I used the Recruit special move. In all the many sessions of Dungeon World I've run, I had never used it before. So this is this is quite fortuitous. This is a synchronicity. I'm very excited. So what do you want to talk about? Well,
so let's start with Hirelings. So when I was new to Dungeon World, I tried to run everything much more by the book, I suppose, than I do now. And I think you're similar in that regard. And I find myself less and less of the time wanting to use Hirelings the way that the book describes them, and more wanting to just make NPCs and have them follow my players around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I find myself making Hirelings less and less as compared to when I first started running Dungeon World. But the reason is not because I think there's anything fundamentally wrong with Hirelings. It's more, my groups are usually like full with players. And so there's not we don't need the Hirelings as far as like rounding out the party, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that does make sense in the regard that, like, you probably need more bodies. But, like, usually, especially in Dungeon World, you don't need, like, a specialized skill set because there's a Defy Danger move, which usually gets you covered for almost anything that your characters your characters are going to have to cope with.
Yeah, unless they're like they were, like my characters were yesterday in like a heavily trap-laden dungeon with no thief. In which case, let me assure you, Defy Danger and DR are not up to the task.
Is that right?
That is absolutely right.
All right, so you've kind of teased at this enough. Like, what happened?
Well, they were in a heavily trap-laden dungeon that they were able to leave freely because it was an urban environment. And they were like, we need a thief. We don't have a thief and we need one. And so I was like, well, you could go get a burglar hireling, I suppose. And, we could maybe, and I presented some options as far as like, you could go talk to some folks, or we could make this character over here a hireling or whatever. And Fraser suggested, hey, there's this move called Recruit. And I was like, oh yeah, there's this move called Recruit. And so we did the Recruit move, and they got the best result on Recruit move, which means that you kind of present them with some options of possible hirelings. And it was a whole fun sequence. I created 3 different hirelings with 3 different sets of strengths and detriments to each of them. And it was really fun. It was a nice, like, fun little sort of sequence, very appropriate for the type of game I'm running right now, which is a more mission oriented kind of game of Dungeon World.
Okay. So I feel like I have to ask, was it helpful for them to have a hireling? Because if I'm reading the rules right, that's a one-time use burglar.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so we spent all this time having this, what I thought was a really fun sequence, where they were essentially, they were kind of like interviewing hirelings, right? So to speak, right? We kind of like talked it out more than we role played it, but basically that was kind of, in our fiction, that's kind of what it all looked like to us, right? And they settled on this burglar, or this hireling with a high burglar stat named Kasai. He was a prick. He was very dismissive of them. He just wanted to be paid. And I mentioned to him that, he has loyalty 0. He will turn on you if it comes down to it. But they chose him because he was the best burglar. And they went in. The first room they got to, he fired off the trap, which was a magical rune that summoned a chimera into the room. They hung back behind a tapestry that was covering the secret doorway, listened to the chimera tear him apart and kill him. And that was it. So yes, he was a fire and forget hireling, but he was very helpful because, for one thing, they didn't have to really deal with the chimera, because what they did, they had a bard who played a soothing song that was able to put the chimera to sleep, and that's how they were able to cope with it. But had they just walked into the room and sprung that trap, they would have been fighting the chimera. I mean, the burglar hiring, the experiment, their move is called experimental trap disarming, right? It's written to be a little comic, and I think that's the point of it, is to be kind of like a comic thing. And in that sense, I think we got exactly what was on the tin. As far as like their overall usefulness, I suppose that's open. That's an open question.
I guess more often than not, I don't go through the whole formal process of an interview and hiring and all that stuff, and then like stat out the hireling. I usually just make an NPC, and if the characters try to get them to do something, that is probably going to trigger some other move that the players must do. And if they're successful at that, then this NPC will probably do what they want them to do. Whether or not it's successful is another matter.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I basically handle it that way too. I often, for an NPC that's tagging along with the party, like tagging along with them in the dungeon, so to speak, I do stat them out, even if I don't tell the party about it. And then if the NPC becomes implicated in the combat or implicated in what's coming up, I then will sometimes like reveal that, or say, oh, okay, well or I'll come up with stats on the fly, right? Like maybe I didn't stat it out beforehand, but I stat them out in the moment. The hireling stats are just there to arbitrate the behavior, the mechanical behavior of the hireling, right? Of any NPC who is tagging along with the group for some reason, right? And I think it works fine, but I think I more or less do what you do, except that I do give them stats if it comes down to it. Like if they want this NPC to do something, that's a loyalty test, right? I think that's the right move to make at that point.
Because I would just have them roll plus charisma. Like like I don't want to have to remember loyalty and then consider, oh, did their loyalty go up or down this session? Like, I don't care. They're hireling. But all that being said, I love the recruit move. I think it's a great move.
Well, so this is weird. Like, what do you like about the recruit moves?
For the recruit move, I love the 3 outcomes. Like, on a 10+, you've got your pick of a number of skilled applicants, your choice who to hire. On a 7 to 9, you'll have to settle for someone close to what you want or turn them away. On a miss, someone influential and ill-suited declares they'd like to come along. A foolhardy youth, a loose cannon, or veiled enemy, for example.
I get why you like that. So what you're saying is you think it's a cool move, but just used in but just with the NPCs that are attracted not having hireling stats, basically, right?
Right, yeah. Just make them whatever they, portend to be. Like, if they're going through all this trouble of, like, they're going to pay somebody to do this thing for them, like, I'd give them the fictional outcome if it was warranted. If they got a 10+ and they're needing a burglar, like, yeah, he would be able to disarm some traps. It might take him some time, but he could do it, and they could be there while he does it.
My only thing about this suggestion of not using the hireling stats and what I would push back on with is I kind of don't want to see NPCs do this stuff, right? I'm more interested in seeing the player characters look great or die trying, right? Than I am like NPCs, like just solving problems for them. And so in that sense, the burglar has like a bit of an appeal to me because they're essentially just a one-shot kind of like thing as far as traps go. Even when I have a torchbearer type hireling hanging around, I don't usually get them involved in the combats and stuff, right? They're just there for like comic relief and conversation, right? So,
well, yeah, I'm not saying they'd be highly functional, but I think of them, I guess, in the way that gangs happen.
Like an Apocalypse World or Monster Hearts or something?
Yeah, like they're going to come with more problems than they're solving, so I don't have a problem.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, I like that. Now that I'm more into. I'm into that. Like, okay, yeah, you have this group of hirelings, you have these people who are doing their thing, and they just like cause trouble also for whatever reason. Yeah, I'm into that. I think that's great.
Yeah, so like if my NPC is good at burglary, then he's probably a kleptomaniac too, or he's just got some other vice that is going to come up later. But like, yeah, he did the thing for you right now. You got through those traps. You still owe him, and he's still going to hang around and like be a problem unless he dies, or you get rid of him, or you solve his problems.
That makes sense to me. I guess like as far as this conversation goes, I'm like on both sides of the fence. I see why you would want to have hirelings statted out, and I also see why you might just be more interested in having them be just like kind of NPC color, right? I mean, if you're doing like a real, room by room, like dungeon crawl where, a lot of people do play Dungeon World that way, right? I mean, a lot of people play Dungeon World in a really combat heavy, encounter heavy way, which I don't think you and I do, but a lot of people do. And in that case, I do think the statted out hireling is a lot more useful.
I think it works. Hirelings work as written. I still prefer to do it.
That's why a lot of people like Jason Lutz's Perilous Wilds, right? Because Perilous Wilds does hirelings and followers in a way that I think a lot of people find more satisfying.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is, what should I be on the lookout for?
Okay, so by the time this episode releases, the Keepers of the Gauntlet contest will be finished. So I'm not going to encourage you to participate, listeners, but we are going to continue with reading off some selections from the contest. We will be reviewing all the contest entries. Myself, David, and our producer, Paul, will be reviewing all of them, and we will come to some decisions about winner and runners up, and we'll have more to announce about that in the future. But in the meantime, David, what have you chosen to highlight this week?
I've chosen an entry called Keeper of the Cloak of Logan Stormbreaker, and it's by Danny Hood.
Logan Stormbreaker, who's that?
In case you haven't been listening to any of the past several episodes where we talked about Logan Stormbreaker, that was a character of mine, and his cloak was particularly interesting in that context, so I was excited to see that somebody selected it to write a little move about. So I'll read that. Logan was part of a small group of wizards that referred to themselves as storm mages. He loved chasing storms with his groundhog familiar and divining the future based on lightning strikes. His most favored possession was his cloak. When you don the Cloak of Logan Stormbreaker, a groundhog will appear soon after and join you.
Sorry. I'm laughing out of mirth, not out of derision. So.
When you decide to influence the weather, explain how the cloak allows that, and roll plus wisdom. On a 10+, choose a weather type from the table below. Within minutes, the weather type will center on you for a 1 mile radius for up to 24 hours. When the weather effects have ended, your groundhog will collapse near death.
Oh my god.
You must nurse him back to health before you can use the cloak again.
Oh my god.
If your groundhog dies, the magic in the cloak will disappear. On a 7 to 9, roll a d8 twice and choose between the 2 weather types from the table below. Within a few hours, the weather type will center on you for half a mile radius for the next 12 hours. Your groundhog is weakened, but will recover if you keep him safe. And on a 6-, the GM determines which weather type centers on you for a 5-foot radius and for how long. Your groundhog acts tired and wants a nap. Our 8 types that we have for that D8 roll. Lightning storm, blinding blizzard, high winds, scorching heat, thick fog, heavy rain, pelting hail, and freezing cold.
I love it. It's so good. This is by Danny Hood. That's awesome.
By Danny Hood.
I love it. It's so... I don't know, it has almost like a, setting aside this sort of like cute factor of the groundhog, it has almost a Final Fantasy vibe to it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it does.
or like a JRPG vibe, right?
Yeah, it's really delightful in that way. I like it. I like that it has the 6- defined, because this is like a really fictional positioning kind of move. I feel like you're probably not getting some immediate, like, this is exactly what we needed right now thing. It's like, it's leading up to something else that you're going to try and use whatever the weather effect you desire for. The 10+ result, you get exactly what you want. On a 7 to 9, you somewhat manage to control the weather. On a 6-, like, the GM determines the weather. It's something that probably we don't think about a whole lot, the weather. And then it's got like an inverse sliding scale where on a 10+, like, you screwed over the poor groundhog and you're going to have to nurse it back to health.
I know. I love it. I love it. Well, and I also love it in this sort of like personal context between you and I and listeners of the We Hunt the Keepers podcast of Logan Stormbreaker is, well, spoiler alert for We Hunt the Keepers, but Logan Stormbreaker is like this kind of horrifying Lovecraftian figure, right? Like in our fiction for Logan Stormbreaker. And so I like this sort of like alternate version where he has
alternate universe
where he has a groundhog.
Adorable, like, groundhog familiar. I love that move. All right, what'd you pick?
I chose The Glossary of Blades by David Lombardo. And I think this is the custom move version. He sent us 2 versions of it. One was like a magic item and one was like a custom move, I believe. In any case, let me read it. Within the great library occulta is stored the Glossary of Blades, a great tome which includes depictions and descriptions of all weapons lost or forgotten. Buried between pages of simple swords and spears dropped by nameless soldiers in forgotten battles are descriptions of mythical weapons of legendary purpose, but only those whose locations are lost. The Glossary of Blades allows each reader to draw a single lost blade from the pages of the book to claim as their own. Beware, the once lost weapons have a tendency to eventually return to the pages. When you browse the Glossary of Blades for a weapon, answer the following questions. What is the legend of this weapon? What great task was it used to accomplish? How does this weapon's power threaten those it is used against? How does it threaten those who wield it? What must someone do to prove they are worthy to wield this weapon? As you withdraw the weapon from the glossary and claim it as your own, roll plus int. On a 10+, the weapon is exactly as described in Legends. On a 7 to 9, the glossary neglected some details. The GM will tell you the true answer to one of the questions above. On a 6-, the GM will tell you of some dark hidden secret within this weapon. Perhaps it is sentient and malicious. It might require some personal cost to wield, or it may have unfinished business that is passed on to you. I love this move. This is like everything I want in a move. It gives the players opportunities to build in fiction. It's got a really great risk reward. I happen to think that the actual move part is really clever, the way it's structured.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, it reminds me of the legacy weapon, and it reminds me of like kind of like some of the painting the scene kind of questions, just about like this particular weapon and not about the scene. It's good.
Yeah, there's tons of good like gameplay technique built into this move. It's really cool.
Let's move on to our next segment.
Hi, listeners. 2 things I want to tell you about today. First, we are giving away 3 softcover copies of Emily Care Boss's game The Romance Trilogy in February. For a chance to win one, all you have to do is follow us on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. Our Twitter followers will be entered into drawings taking place on February 14th, 21st, and 28th. And we're doing these Twitter drawings all year, so be sure to follow us at Gauntlet RPG. The second thing I want to tell you about is the new issue of Codex. It's called Codex Blood 2, and it will be in our Patreon feed through February. It is the best issue of Codex yet. Here's what's inside. Dia de los Muertos, which are procedures for a 4-session gaming event involving the final girl and cheat your own adventure. 5 more blood-soaked magic items for Dungeon World. The Croatoa, a dark and intense OSR scenario. Our newest Gauntlet daddy, Fang Bang, and 3 dozen cult horror movies. To get access to Codex Blood 2, just make a $4 pledge on the Gauntlet Patreon by February 28th. As a bonus, you'll also get the original Codex Blood. So go to patreon.com/gauntlet and check it out. Thanks.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen. Listeners, we will be continuing the adventure of St. Evelyn the White, also known as the Mad Saint, who most recently got out of the town square where the soldiers had just returned, retreating or just marching back from their latest campaign that seemed unsuccessful from the amount of the dead that were being brought back with them. St. Evelyn found a place to stay with a sign that had a root vegetable, a musical note, and a kind of grass kind of substance on the sign. And she was informed by a man inside that it was called the Beet and Barley Inn. And that man was strumming a half harp and seemed to know more about St. Evelyn than he had any business of knowing, as he sang her a song about her past exploits and where they went badly for St. Evelyn. And then the owner, who we found out from, the man's name is Zagan, and the owner's name is Marlene. The owner came rushing in, seemed very upset, and went behind the counter. And we'll pick up with immediately there. St. Evelyn, what do you do?
I'll walk up to Marlene.
So she's behind the bar. She's crying and trying to compose herself. Like, do you walk behind the bar?
No, I just walk up to the bar. Is there anyone else around?
No, it's just you, Zagan, Marlene. Everyone else is outside or in their rooms.
Ma'am, what troubles you so?
Hello. And she has an apron on, and she just lifts it up and dabs her eyes, and takes a deep breath, composes herself. I've had some bad news. I'm sorry I wasn't here to welcome you.
Oh, no worries. Your minstrel has been very, very hospitable.
Oh, well, that's good. And she kind of glances past you, then leans in. It's like, he's not my minstrel. I don't know him very well, to be honest. He's new around here. And so are you. I don't believe I've met you before. I'm Marlene.
Hello, Marlene. My name is Evelyn the White.
Well, Evelyn, I see how you get your name. Welcome, I suppose, to Felbit and to my inn. Yeah, I guess it's my inn now. She looks very, very downcast, and the music begins to swell.
Marlene, has your husband passed away?
She looks at you, and then over your shoulder at the man playing music, and she seems kind of angry for half a second, but then it just all comes rushing out, and she just breaks down and just lays her head on the bar and begins crying. I suppose there's no reason to try and keep any of that from even strangers in this town, but yes, I have just found out. He was slain.
Slain? By who? Was he fighting in the war?
Yes, best I can tell. In any case, he is dead. His body is at the church. They brought him back with the last caravan.
Out of character, do I have any reason to believe that there's something fishy about his death?
Maybe that she's not sure if he was killed or not. That seems kind of strange.
I think I would be paying very close attention to her, as well as paying close attention to the state of the bar, keeping an eye open for anything that would reveal some kind of problem or deeper mystery with this place. If I get the sense that it's just a grieving widow and nothing more to it than that, I'll offer her my condolences and go to my room. But if there's something more going on, I'd like to at least see if I can pick up on that.
Sure. Discern realities unless you have a more appropriate move on your playbook.
No, I think DR's right. I got a 12.
Very good. 3 questions.
What should I be on the lookout for?
You recall Marlene's 2 statements that her husband was dead and that maybe he was slain. But she wasn't very clear about that. And you know that she said the body was at the church and she just came in from outside. So it's questionable. You might be on the lookout for somebody who's deceiving her.
What here is not what it appears to be.
As you're talking to Marlene, you kind of turn halfway to the bar to, get on one of the stools or something. And out of the corner of your eye, you notice the man who's playing the half harp. It looks like he has little black hooves for feet. But the second that you get your eyes fully on them, it's just his very, very luxurious, surprisingly luxurious soft leather boots feeding right onto his black pants. But then when you look away again, out of the corner of your eye, you swear he has soft black little hooves.
What is about to happen?
He keeps playing songs, and he's not singing the words to the songs. The tune he's playing right now, you recognize it, and it is a song about a bard who seduces tavern maids.
I put my hands on Marlene's hands, and I say, I'm very sorry for your loss, but I'm going to have to ask you to do something right now that might seem a bit odd.
She's very distraught, and she looks at you with red rimmed eyes. What?
Do you have a weapon behind the bar?
And she pulls her hands out back from you and kind of looks shocked, like, of course, everyone has something behind the bar, but what are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting you hand it over to me, and then you step outside for a moment. There's something in here that needs to be dealt with.
That seems like a great place to cut it. That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of the Gauntlet. We can be found on the community section of G+. Just go to that section and search for the Gauntlet. We are there. We are on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. We have a website, gauntlet-rpg.com. On that website, you will find links to all of our other podcasts, as well as a free issue of our Codex zine and information about GauntletCon. And we're also on Patreon at patreon.com/Gauntlet.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.
I'm quoting RuPaul. Someone turns 18 years old every single day.